our hearts are with the staff of Charlie Hebdo and their families tonight. I know very few people go into comedy, you know, as an act of courage, mainly because it shouldn't have to be that. It shouldn't be an act of courage. It should be taken as established law. But those guys at Hebdo had it, and they were killed for their cartoons.
Those who tell jokes for a living will tell you that nothing is off limits, because if you place something controversial in the context of comedy, it gives everybody a better chance to examine their own beliefs, social mores, and what deserves more serious attention. But the events in France this week, the killing of cartoonists over what they deemed comedic satire, may change forever how not only the world, but those who seek to find the humor in everything conduct themselves for fear of reprisal. Let's welcome to MidPoint. He's a veteran comedian and host of the Paul Mercurio Show, podcast on iTunes, and a member of the original writing team for The Daily Show. Paul Mercurio joins us. Paul, thanks so much for being here today.
Sure thing, and thanks for having me. Nice to be with you.
Paul, do you consider yourself as a comedian taking on an act of courage, as Jon Stewart said?
Well, I don't want to sound too lofty, but I am driving around in an armored vehicle from now on. It's a little bizarre, you know. It's a cartoon, but my concern is that this is a slippery slope that started with the interview, the movie, that the theaters acquiesced to the threats of North Korea, and Sony did as well. And I think terrorists saw this.
Paul, excuse me just a moment. I'm going to have to interrupt you one moment, Paul. Please stand by in New York. Now let's get back to New York. Unfortunately, we had to get involved and interrupt Paul Mercurio, who joins us once again. Paul, I hope you're back with us.
I am. I'm here. I was listening to the president. Yeah, it's an interesting time, you know. I mean, what we were talking about is sort of what's going on in Paris, and I think it's tied to what North Korea did. I think North Korea saw that they could bully us into submission, and to some extent we acquiesced, and I think that sent a very bad signal to the world that, you know, we're going to use a strong arm to get people to curtail their freedom of speech. I mean, look, it was Korea. What was the threat regarding Korea? Let's step back and think about that for a minute. That they were going to use the bomb on us? It's Korea, Ed. Have you ever owned anything made in Korea that's worked? Really? I mean, so I think on some level, you know, this is a very alarming time. And now more than ever, comedians, satirists, writers, cartoonists can't back down. It would just set a very bad precedent.
Well, let's start there then. Where do you as a comic draw the line? Because there are some people who would say that the cartoons drawn by the cartoonists there in France were insulting, degrading. They took on a religion. They did take on all religions. Let's be very fair. These guys didn't go after Muslims. They went after everybody. Right. But people will say, don't you find a line you got to draw somewhere?
No, I don't. Look, why is religion not fair game as part of the culture that we satirize? It's in centuries of satirization of all aspects of our culture. And I agree with you. If it were just the Muslims, then I would say they have a valid point. But look, I'm Catholic. There are cartoons sitting right next to the one about Muhammad, about the Pope. Am I offended? No, I mean, yeah, you have to have a sense of humor about this stuff. I mean, look, there was an issue, and the AP is also culpable in this, because there was an art exhibit called Piss Christ, which was a crucifix that an artist put in his urine, and a lot of the Catholics were outraged, and the AP said, we're not going to show those photos. Well, AP is a news organization, and they said, we're not going to show any images.
Well, let's be fair. I want to interrupt you for a second, because I want to bring some context to what you said, and you are correct. Associated Press has a bank of photos that's available for the media to purchase and use in newscasts. And what you're talking about is a statue of Christ. I believe it was on the cross, and it was in a pool of urine, I believe is what it is. It had been in there for purchase, and people had used it. But right after this event, the AP said, we're not going to show that anymore. But they had been selling it for years before that.
Yeah, and I think that sets a bad precedent, because and what they said was that it was deliberately provocative. Well, there's another term for images that are deliberately provocative. It's called news photos. News is supposed to provoke. It's supposed to inform and let us decide how we feel about the news. When we start selectively choosing what people should see and read and not, that sort of speaks to a much larger issue of dictating to people how they should think. And that is a place where we should not be going.
All right, now let's talk about where you do go then. In your own act there, how far
Yeah.
do you go? Would you then tell a joke about a Muslim? And I'm not talking, let's not do it here because we don't want to do a full-blown act here.
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
would you
No,
tell
no,
a
no.
joke about a Muslim or somebody who studies Islam?
Yes, I would. If I thought it was justified and I thought that there was a premise for it and that it was called for. Look, I'm not going to take just a shot at somebody for the sake of taking a shot at somebody. But I do think that if I have an opinion about something, no matter if it's religion or if it's the President of the United States or the Speaker of the House or a newscaster, I should be able to say it. And your choice is to not read it or to turn it off and not focus on it. I mean, no one is putting a gun to your head to digest this information. You can just move on from it.
Here we
and
have...
I make jokes about...
Oh, go ahead. Finish, please.
Go ahead. Well, no, look, I mean, like, here's a perfect example. I'm not going to do my act, but when we were trying to find bin Laden years ago, I was saying in my act, he's 6'8". Why can't you find the guy? Just stand on a stool and go, oh, yeah, there he is right there. Now, that's a fairly harmless joke, but you could argue that I'm making a joke about a Muslim and therefore I should be killed. Well, you know, where's the balance here? That's all I'm saying.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that balance here, because what happened in France was despicable, certainly. I mean, we have Kalashnikov-bearing individuals who go in and kill people. I read just the other day we're in the Pacific Northwest, I believe it was in Seattle, where a guy is doing a stand-up comic act. Somebody didn't like what he said. They got up with a baseball bat and smacked him in the head. And he's now in the hospital. I actually saw the picture. The guy got close to suffering a concussion. So you're now a performer. You're out here in front of people every night. You're in front of a live audience. Do you now fear for your life or fear that somebody will come after you now because they feel as if they're entitled to come after comics?
I mean, look, I think you're going to think twice a little bit now, but I do think you have to go forward. I don't want to say I'm being courageous. Courage I use for people who are cops and firefighters or in the military. I mean, those are people who have courage. I'm just an idiot telling jokes. But, you know, this issue doesn't stop with religion and terrorism. This is a conversation that we've been having for a long time about race and how far you can go with race in this culture and what you can and cannot talk about on a comedy stage about race. And it's the same thing. I think if it's not deliberately meant to be deliberately mean, I should be able to have an opinion about anything and no one should come at me. Look, I talk about race in my act. I talk about that we all stereotype.
Do you tell jokes about blacks? Do you tell jokes about Asians? Do you tell jokes about other cultures?
I do. Listen, I tell jokes about myself. I'm Italian. I'm 100% Italian. And when people hear that, they usually say one of two things to me. They either say plastic on the furniture or mafia. That's what they think. Now, that's a form of racism, but we're
Wait a minute, though. Is that a form of
racism?
racism, though? I think you just hit on something. Is that a form of racism or is that humor? I mean, where's the delineating line?
It's humor. Right. It's a really good question. I think racism is one thing. Stereotypes based on race is a different thing. And that's a stereotype based on race. And you know what? Honestly, one of them is true. I have a cousin that sells stuff that fell off the truck. I'm not making that up, okay? He's a guy who's, okay, that's my cousin, and that's what he sells car alarms, by the way, that were stolen out of other people's cars. He's out of his mind. But the point is that I should be able to have opinions about race. And now as a white person and a white male in this culture now particularly, it's difficult because theoretically I'm the oppressor and everybody's upset with me, okay? And so minorities, Asians, blacks, Hispanic comedians have a greater birth, if you will, to be able to say what they want about race because they've been an oppressed
Well, then
group,
let me ask that because you hit on a good point here, though. As a white guy, can you tell a joke about a black person?
Yeah, listen,
because there seems to be, there's a lot of people who say that you shouldn't be able to, and there's people who say that you shouldn't joke about blacks and blacks shouldn't joke about whites. I mean, where do you draw the line here? Or do
Well, the very fact, this is just me, the very fact that someone says I shouldn't do something, I'm going to do it, okay? And I don't know if that's just me being a contrarian for the sake of being a contrarian, but look, look, here's a perfect example. I am a basketball fan, and I'm a fan of Larry Bird. And I'm saying this on stage right now, in part because he was a great player, but in part because he was white, and I related to him more than I relate to black players. Now, I don't think that's racist, and black people hear it and laugh and nod their head. I'm just being honest that I relate to certain people more than I relate to other people. That doesn't make me racist. That doesn't mean I don't like black people. And black comedians, Hispanic comedians, they'll go on stage and they make fun of white people all the time. They'll do like the black guy voice where they make the guy sound all cool, and then they do the white guy voice and make him sound like a nerd like that. Well, that's a bit of form of stereotype. I don't talk like that. You don't talk like that. So is that appropriate? I think it's okay. It doesn't offend me. But if they can do it, I should be able to do it.
30 seconds in, do we need to tell more jokes about race and color and creed and sex and religion, whatever, simply because maybe it goes over our back, we get used to it and just call it a joke and walk away?
Yes, yes, because honestly, and I believe this in my heart, people that say that they don't stereotype based on race or they aren't a little bit racist are lying to you. The people that are admitted in public are the ones who are not, okay? Because if you truly are, you just say, look, I see an Asian person, I think classical pianist. That's what I think, you know? I'm sorry, you know? And I don't think that's offensive, but look, that sort of is that group sort of is good at a certain thing and many, many other things as well. And you need to be able to say things about everything in our culture because it keeps everybody honest.
There you go.
And everybody can digest that information the way they want.
That, I think, is the most important thing. Paul, I appreciate the conversation. I want to remind everybody that the Paul Mercurio Show is on iPod, on podcast there as well. Come on back again. We're going to do this again, talk a little bit more about what goes on in society. And by the way, I'm glad you're not a Knicks fan if you're a basketball fan. Thanks a lot, Paul. Take care.
It's a bad year. Absolutely. Thanks, Ed.
All right. Coming up next on MidPoint, another comic and what he said.